It was supposed to be a night of politics, ideas, and energy. More than 3,000 people had gathered inside Utah Valley University's event center, eager to hear one of America's most recognizable conservative voices, Charlie Kirk. His American Comeback Tour had drawn crowds across the country, and on September 10, 2025, the stage was set for yet another rallying speech. But within minutes, everything would change. As Kirk addressed the audience, a single shot cracked through the air. The sound was sharp, almost surreal. In an instant, confusion rippled across the crowd. Screams followed, then panic. Security scrambled, attendees ducked for cover, and the world seemed to tilt off its axis. Charlie Kirk collapsed on stage, struck in the neck by the bullet. Medical teams rushed forward, but the wound was fatal. Before the night was over, news networks across America had already begun broadcasting the headlines. Charlie Kirk shot dead at Utah University event, and then came another name. Not the name of a political leader. Not the name of a celebrity or a figure known in Washington. The name was Tyler James Robinson, a 22-year-old man from Utah, the man who had pulled the trigger. The shock was immediate. Who was Tyler Robinson? Why had he done this? And how did a young man end up at the center of one of the most shocking political killings in recent memory? Within hours, his mugshot was everywhere. Social media feeds lit up with speculation. Politicians rushed to issue statements. Theories spread faster than facts. Some painted him as a lone extremist, others as a deeply troubled individual. But behind the headlines, behind the quick takes, was a person and a story that few understood. This isn't just the story of a tragic death on a university stage. This is the story of Tyler Robinson, his life, his choices, the path that led him into that crowded auditorium, and the devastating decision that ended one man's life and changed his own forever. Because to truly understand the killing of Charlie Kirk, we have to look beyond the victim and into the life of the man who pulled the trigger. So who was Tyler Robinson, and what made him capable of such a shocking act? To answer that, we have to go back to the beginning. Tyler James Robinson was not a household name. Born in 2003, he grew up in Utah, far from the spotlight of national politics. Friends and neighbors described him as quiet, sometimes reserved, the kind of person who could blend into the background without drawing much attention. On the surface, there was little to suggest that he would one day commit an act that would shock the nation. Robinson's childhood, like many others, was marked by the ordinary rhythms of small-town life. School, part-time jobs, hours spent online. He wasn't the star athlete, nor the outspoken classmate. Instead, he occupied a space many young men do, searching for identity, struggling with pressures, uncertain about his place in the world. Yet beneath that ordinary surface, there were fractures. Those close to him would later recall moments of instability, flashes of anger, stretches of isolation, a tendency to drift away rather than seek help. In hindsight, these were warning signs, but at the time they blended into the background noise of a young man trying to figure himself out. While Charlie Kirk was rising in prominence, filling auditoriums, sparking debates, and building a loyal following, Robinson's life seemed to move in the opposite direction. Where Kirk thrived in the spotlight, Robinson withdrew from it. Where Kirk built a platform, Robinson seemed unable to find solid ground. It is this stark contrast between a figure of influence and a man struggling in obscurity that makes what happened in September 2025 all the more unsettling. At 22, Robinson faced the same uncertainties many young adults do, questions about career, about purpose, about belonging. But layered on top of these ordinary struggles were deeper currents. Prosecutors would later describe him as someone harboring grievances, though they stopped short of labeling them as purely political. Others suggested his actions may have stemmed from a volatile mix of frustration, disillusionment, and untreated mental health challenges. It's important to pause here. To understand a person's background is not to excuse their actions. Tyler Robinson's choices were his own, and the devastation they caused is undeniable. But to examine who he was, and the path he walked, is to search for context in a story that otherwise feels senseless. Because tragedies like these rarely emerge from nowhere. They are built, piece by piece, from lives that unravel in slow, often invisible ways. By the time Robinson walked into Utah Valley University on September 10th, his name meant little outside his immediate circle. He was another face in the crowd, another young man carrying the weight of his private struggles. No one in that audience of 3,000 could have known that he would soon be at the center of a national nightmare. And no one could have predicted how violently his life and Charlie Kirk's would collide. To understand that collision, we need to look closer at the days and hours leading up to the shooting, the steps Tyler Robinson took, and the choices he made before everything changed. In the weeks before September 10, 2025, Tyler Robinson's life appeared unremarkable. No major headlines, no public warnings. But looking back, investigators would later piece together a series of actions that suggested intent, steps that transformed quiet frustration into violent preparation. Robinson followed news of Charlie Kirk's upcoming appearance at Utah Valley University. Flyers were posted across campus, the event was heavily promoted online, and anticipation built among Kirk's supporters. Robinson wasn't a student there, but he knew the rally was open to the public. Thousands were expected to attend. At some point, Robinson made his decision. He acquired a firearm, though investigators have not fully disclosed when or how. What is clear is that he carried it into the venue on the evening of the event, concealed among a crowd of 3,000. The details of his mindset in those final days remain a mystery. Was this carefully planned, or the culmination of festering impulses that finally erupted? Friends described him as withdrawn in the days leading up to the shooting, though no one suspected what he was preparing to do. He attended to ordinary tasks, blending into routine, while privately moving toward catastrophe. On September 10th, Robinson arrived at Utah Valley University. Security at the event was present but limited, common for a campus setting, even with a high-profile guest. Robinson entered with little resistance, passing as another attendee among thousands. He carried with him not just a weapon, but a decision that would soon alter the course of the evening. Inside, the energy was high. Students, community members, and political supporters filled the hall, waiting for Kirk to take the stage. As music played and anticipation grew, Robinson positioned himself in the audience. Whether he chose his spot deliberately or simply seized an opportunity remains a point of speculation. What we do know is that he placed himself within striking distance of his target. Witnesses later recalled seeing nothing unusual about him. He wasn't agitated, he wasn't drawing attention. In a sea of faces, he was just another young man waiting for the program to begin. That anonymity, his ability to fade into the crowd, made the events that followed all the more chilling. By the time Charlie Kirk stepped onto the stage, the trap was already set. Robinson was in place, armed and waiting. Thousands of eyes were on the speaker, none on the man who would soon commit an irreversible act. The air was thick with applause and expectation, the kind of energy that fills political rallies. And then in a single moment, the line between ordinary and unthinkable disappeared. The decision Robinson had carried with him into that hall was about to be unleashed, and with one motion, one pull of the trigger, the night and the lives of everyone inside would be changed forever. What happened next would unfold in seconds. A single gunshot, a wave of chaos, and the death of Charlie Kirk. This is the moment when Tyler Robinson stepped from anonymity into infamy. It happened in an instant. As Charlie Kirk addressed the audience, his voice filling the auditorium, a sharp crack cut through the noise. At first, some thought it was a technical glitch, a speaker popping, a microphone breaking. But within seconds, the truth was undeniable. A bullet had been fired. And it struck its target. Charlie Kirk collapsed to the stage floor, hit in the neck. Gasps echoed through the room, quickly followed by panic. People screamed, ducked beneath chairs, and scrambled toward exits. The energy of excitement just moments earlier twisted into fear and confusion. Security rushed the stage. Staff members called for medics. Some in the crowd froze, unable to process what had just unfolded in front of them. Others pulled out phones, recording, texting, broadcasting chaos in real time to the outside world. And there in the middle of it all, was Tyler Robinson. The young man who had walked in as an anonymous attendee was now the center of the storm. Witnesses described seeing him holding the weapon, stunned at first, as if realizing the enormity of what he had just done. Within moments, security forces closed in and disarmed him. He was taken into custody as terrified audience members continued to flee. On the stage, emergency responders fought to save Kirk's life. But the wound was catastrophic. Despite every effort, it was clear he would not survive. Within minutes, news outlets began to report what thousands inside already knew. Charlie Kirk had been shot. The entire sequence lasted only seconds. One trigger pull, one life lost, one man taken into custody. But those seconds reshaped lives. A community was traumatized. A movement had lost its leader, and a 22-year-old man had sealed his fate. With Kirk gone and Robinson in custody, the focus shifted immediately. Who was this young man? Why had he done it? And what consequences would he now face for the act that had stunned the nation? The arrest itself happened quickly. Within moments of the gunshot, event security and local police closed in on Tyler Robinson. He offered little resistance. Witnesses described the scene as almost surreal. The same young man who had just fired the fatal shot now subdued, surrounded by armed officers, his weapon confiscated. The chaos of the crowd continued around him. But Robinson was silent, almost expressionless, as he was led away. At the station, his identity was confirmed. Tyler James Robinson, 22 years old with no major criminal record. But the charges he now faced were anything but minor. Prosecutors moved swiftly, filing counts of aggravated murder, felony discharge of a firearm, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering. Each one carried severe penalties. Together they painted a picture of deliberate action. Not an accident, not a mistake, but a crime executed with intent. Within days, Utah County prosecutors announced they were weighing the most serious penalty available under state law, the death penalty. Their language was clear and uncompromising. This was not a case they intended to treat lightly. They described Robinson as a dangerous individual who had not only ended a life but threatened the safety of thousands in that auditorium. Observers noted Robinson's demeanor during his early court appearances. Some described him as blank, others as detached. There were no dramatic outbursts, no attempts at justification. He stood before the judge in silence, absorbing the weight of charges that could define the rest of his life, or end it. With Robinson behind bars, the legal process had begun. But the arrest answered only one question: who had pulled the trigger? It did nothing to explain why. And as the courtroom prepared for months, perhaps years, of proceedings, the public was left with a burning question. What could drive a 22-year-old man to commit such a shocking act? To answer that, we need to look beyond the courthouse walls and into the public's response. The outrage, the speculation, and the storm of political reaction that followed. News of Charlie Kirk's death spread with staggering speed. Within minutes, social media platforms were flooded with videos from inside the auditorium. Headlines blared across every major network. And with each update, one name kept appearing: Tyler Robinson. The young man once unknown was now infamous, the subject of nationwide outrage and speculation. For Kirk's supporters, the grief was immediate. Tributes poured in online and at makeshift memorials. Political allies praised him as a fearless advocate for his beliefs. To them, Robinson was no ordinary criminal. He was a villain who had cut short the life of a leader they admired. But reactions did not stop there. The shooting ignited political debate across the country. Some framed Robinson as a product of growing polarization, the embodiment of dangerous rhetoric taken too far. Others cautioned against drawing conclusions too quickly, warning that his motives remained unclear. What was certain, however, was that his act had struck a nerve in America's already fractured political landscape. In the days that followed, Robinson became a symbol in the media. To some outlets, he was a radicalized assassin. To others, he was a deeply troubled young man who had slipped through the cracks. Commentators debated endlessly. Was this political violence, or was it the outburst of a disturbed individual? Amid the debate, misinformation flourished. Fabricated stories, AI-generated images, and conspiracy theories spread online. Some posts falsely identified other suspects, while others invented connections between Robinson and political groups without evidence. These false narratives blurred the line between fact and fiction, making it even harder to separate truth from speculation. In just days, Tyler Robinson had become more than a man. He was a headline, a talking point, a symbol molded by fear, anger, and politics. But beneath the noise, the question remained unanswered. Why? What had driven him to take a gun into that auditorium and fire a single devastating shot? To get closer to that answer, we need to look at what investigators, prosecutors, and experts have tried to piece together about Robinson's motives and the complex psychology behind acts of violence like this. If there is one question that has haunted investigators, the public, and the families involved, it is this: why? Why would a 22-year-old man like Tyler Robinson walk into an auditorium and pull the trigger? Motive is the hardest element to pin down in cases like this, yet it is also the most important. Without it, we are left only with the act itself, sudden, violent, and seemingly senseless. Some immediately suspected politics. After all, Charlie Kirk was not just a public figure. He was a polarizing one. Loved by his supporters, fiercely criticized by his opponents. It seemed plausible that Robinson's act was rooted in ideology. But so far, prosecutors have stopped short of defining the shooting as politically motivated. They have acknowledged that Robinson followed Kirk's work, but they have not presented conclusive evidence that his decision was driven by partisan allegiance or hatred. Others point to Robinson's personal life. Accounts suggest he wrestled with frustration, isolation, and a lack of clear direction. For some, his act looked less like the product of ideology and more like the collapse of an unstable young man. A person overwhelmed by inner battles no one fully understood. This possibility has led many to ask whether mental health struggles played a decisive role, and if intervention might have changed the course of events. Experts in criminal psychology often warn against simple answers. Acts of violence like this are rarely the result of one factor. Instead, they grow out of a combination: personal grievances, identity struggles, political anger, and sometimes untreated illness. Robinson's story may contain pieces of each of these, and it is precisely that complexity that makes it so difficult to categorize him neatly as either a political extremist or a troubled loner. There is also the question of recognition. Some psychologists argue that individuals who commit public acts of violence are driven, at least in part, by a desire to be seen, to transform anonymity into notoriety. For someone like Robinson, whose life until that point was largely invisible to the world, the act of pulling a trigger inside a hall packed with cameras guaranteed he would no longer be overlooked. But at what cost? He exchanged invisibility for infamy, and freedom for a prison cell. The truth about Robinson's motives may never be fully known. He has not offered public explanations, and investigators continue to sift through fragments of his life. What remains is a disturbing picture. A young man whose choices intersected with a public figure's path in the most tragic way imaginable. His actions leave us not only with grief, but with questions about society, politics, and the fragile line between private struggle and public violence. And that brings us to the broader implications. Because this story is not just about Tyler Robinson or Charlie Kirk. It is about what their collision reveals about America itself. A nation grappling with polarization, violence, and the dangers of a world where public figures are increasingly at risk. The story of Tyler Robinson does not exist in isolation. His act, the shooting of Charlie Kirk, is not just the collision of two lives, but a mirror held up to a nation already wrestling with profound divisions. To understand the weight of what happened that night, we have to step back and look at the bigger picture. In the United States, political discourse has grown increasingly hostile. Leaders are not only debated, but vilified. Supporters are not just opponents, but enemies. In such an environment, Violence becomes easier to imagine, and in rare but devastating cases, easier to commit. Robinson's act, whether rooted in ideology or not, becomes part of this troubling pattern, a reminder that words, grievances, and anger can spill into bloodshed. The shooting also underscored a glaring vulnerability: the security of public figures. Charlie Kirk was speaking to an audience of 3,000 on a university campus, with limited protective measures. Events like these, rallies, town halls, community forums, are designed to be accessible, but that accessibility comes with risk. After the shooting, officials across the country began reassessing how to protect speakers without turning every gathering into a fortress. Experts also warn of the so-called copycat effect. When one act of political violence gains massive attention, it can inspire others seeking notoriety. Robinson's actions may therefore cast a shadow longer than his own story, raising fears that future individuals might follow his path for reasons as complex, or as shallow, as his. Ultimately, Tyler Robinson's crime was more than the killing of one man. It was a blow to the fragile trust that allows public life to function. It reminded Americans that their divisions are not just rhetorical, they can turn deadly. And it posed a sobering question: how many more warnings will it take before the cycle of polarization and violence is broken? And so, as we return to the heart of this story, we're left with the devastating reality. Charlie Kirk is gone. Tyler Robinson is in custody facing the possibility of the death penalty. But the echoes of that single gunshot are still being felt far beyond the walls of Utah Valley University. On September 10, 2025, the lives of two men collided in the most devastating way possible. Charlie Kirk, a figure known across the nation, was struck down in front of thousands. Tyler Robinson, once anonymous, became the face of one of the most shocking acts of violence in recent memory. One life ended. Another life, though not lost, was forever destroyed. Today, Robinson sits in custody, facing charges that could bring the ultimate penalty. Yet the larger questions remain unanswered. Was his act the product of politics, of personal demons, or of something more complicated? And what does it say about the state of a nation, where anger, division, and despair can so easily erupt into violence? We may never have a clear answer to the why. But we are left with the what now, what this means for political discourse, for public safety, and for the fragile bonds holding a divided country together. If this story has made you think, I encourage you to share your perspective. Like this video, subscribe for more true crime investigations, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice matters in keeping these conversations alive. Because only by facing these stories head-on can we begin to understand them, and perhaps prevent the next one.